CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. Tension rises in Ethiopia amid a state of emergency and rebel fighters threatening to march in the capital. Ousted Sudanese Prime Minister on the brink of a return to leading the country's government. And we have an update from the COP26 climate talks. We begin in Ethiopia, where a state of emergency has been declared for 6 months. This is after forces from the northern region of Tigray claim to have seized key cities. Tuesday's announcement came 2 days after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed urged citizens to take up arms to defend themselves against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has reiterated his call for an immediate end to the hostilities and ensure humanitarian aid reaches the northern region. The U.S. Embassy in Ethiopia has ordered Americans to consider leaving the country. Where Giram Chala has more from the capital, Addis Ababa, for us. Hi, Giram. We are getting reports of people fleeing the capital, Addis Ababa. What more can you tell us about that, Giram?
Well, Hannah, as you've said, after the declaration of the state of emergency, that's a nationwide state of emergency following the government's announcement of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the nation is endangered. There were panics here and there amongst citizens, residents of the city, and the diplomatic community as well. But at the moment, we can confirm that the city is calm and the other parts of the country as well. But we have heard, as you've said, from the U.S. Embassy, for instance, the security alert is saying that U.S. nationals are expected not to travel outside of the city, and others also not to enter the country, as they are expecting conflict to intensify and the TPLF force to advance to the city. But at the moment, we cannot really verify that diplomats are fleeing from the country, but we have heard from others that there are preparations for evacuation in case the worst happens. But the story of many diplomats leaving the country cannot be verified. We've tried to speak to some embassies and others. They can only confirm that they are preparing, but there is no mass evacuation happening at the moment. But people still are panicking. Some are, of course, leaving the country, but not necessarily in terms of an evacuation that's happening because there is a danger and panic in the city.
Giram, how is the Ethiopian federal government responding to the threat by rebels to march in the capital?
So, first of all, Hannah, today marks exactly a year since the war in the north started, after what the government said, the TPLF assaults against the northern command. And the commemoration was happening here at the headquarters of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. The Prime Minister was there. He talked about the way forward. He said that his government, the army of the country are trying to handle the situation in the north, trying to put where the rebels are, for them not to advance to the center of the country. In fact, to chase them away much further. This is a military plan that he and his generals have devised, and he's saying that the government is confident, his administration and the ENDF are confident that they will win the war at the end of the day. On the other hand, as you know, TPLF has announced that it has created a merger between them and the Oromo Liberation Army, which was, by the way, operating in the western part of the country. Now they are in the north. Reportedly, they are together, and the plan is to march into the capital city of Addis Ababa, perhaps in the next few months or weeks, according to. But we cannot verify this information, as still there is information communication blackout in the north. So the government's plan is to continue the military assault against the TPLF force, and on the other side, they are also planning to defeat the army. So the situation is intensified. The war has continued, especially in Kombolcha and Wollo areas, and we have to wait and report in the next hours or perhaps days what's going to happen.
Giram, thank you so much for that update. We'll keep speaking with you on this developing story. Well, to some news coming out of Sudan now, ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has now reportedly agreed to return to lead a government. Citing unnamed sources, Saudi-owned Al Arabiya TV said Hamdok agreed to make the move on the condition that political detainees are released. This comes just after a week after Sudan's top general locked up political leaders and seized power, sparking mass protests and a deadly crackdown. Well, CGTN's Naba Muhyiddin is on standby in Khartoum and brings us the latest from Sudan. Thank you so much for joining us, Naba. Some reports indicating there could be a breakthrough in negotiations in Sudan. What's the latest on this, Naba?
Actually, the news about Abdallah Hamdok has agreed to join the new civilian-led government is not confirmed yet. There was some reports said and some sources said yes, it's true, but other people said it's not true. So till this moment, it's not confirmed that Abdallah Hamdok has agreed or something like this. He talked about conditions to be appointed again as a prime minister, including releasing the politicians and to restore or reinstate. None of these conditions were achieved or fulfilled or responded by the military generals. So I don't think we can say that the news are confirmed. Some sources denied it at all, but we are waiting for more confirmation. Maybe we'll hear something by the end of the day, but till this moment, the news are not confirmed.
Now, but just from what you're hearing and hearing people talk, what are the expectations from the people of Sudan for the government that will eventually take charge of the country?
There is expectations and there is hopes. Expectations, people expect Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok to, with the support of the international community, to put more pressure on the generals to restore Hamdok's government and to have Hamdok back on the civilian-led government. This is the expectations. People expect Hamdok to appoint, if he is back, to appoint a government out of technocrats to solve the problem with military political parties conflict. This is the expectations and hopes of people. In the same time, people are expecting also the generals to go through the plan they announced with forming a civilian-led government and to just ignore Hamdok and his government, because in the current situation, every party, like the generals, the politicians, the pro-democracy groups, they are clinging to what they said. It's not clear, the vision is not clear yet, and there is a very cautious silence. But some news said the generals will go forward in their plans and they will announce a civilian-led government, whether with Hamdok or not.
Thank you so much for all that. Naba Muhyiddin speaking to us from Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Well, it's day 3 of the COP26 UN Climate Conference in Glasgow. Wednesday's focus will be the role of finance in achieving net zero emissions. Let's get the latest from our correspondent, Julian Mann. Thank you so much for joining us, Juliet. What should we expect to dominate the agenda today at the UN Climate Summit?
Well, as you say, day 3 is dedicated to finance. In fact, the UK Finance Minister, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, is going to be announcing sweeping reforms to position Britain as the world's first leading financial centre dedicated to net zero. So he's going to say, look, most by 2023, which isn't that far off, most big firms, most financial institutions are going to need to set out and put forward detailed plans of what their transition journey is to net zero. And it will be up to the markets to decide or to determine whether those transition plans are really credible or if it's just greenwashing. There's also expected to be a big announcement by an alliance of 450 firms who own together or are responsible for 40% of the world's global financial assets. Now, here's a number to try and get your head round. We're talking about $130 trillion that they control, and they've all aligned to commit to making sure that global warming doesn't rise above 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And also an important event happening right now, actually, at COP26. It's a panel being hosted by Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, who's the UK's UN Special Envoy for Climate and Finance. And that's on voluntary carbon schemes and all of those things. So expect today a lot of proposals for forever changes to the financial plumbing of the global financial system.
You're talking about a lot of proposals, Juliet. Are you hearing or seeing any signs of countries that are at the summit moving towards concrete decisions on enhancing protection of the planet?
You know what, it's probably a little bit too early to talk about any kind of breakthrough. There's a lot of ground to cover, there are a lot of variables, but today is really the first working day where negotiations can begin, and that's why all the country delegations are in meetings and they're having these panels to try and come to some kind of agreement. All the world leaders, they were here on Monday and Tuesday, but now they've gone back to their day jobs. They've shown their faces, they've talked up their commitments and their proposals, but now it's up to their delegations, their climate teams to work things out. Now, low carbon firms, Joe Biden, they have been hailing progress so far as successful. If you think about the decision to cut methane emissions targets, that's one thing, and also the deal to stop deforestation. You also have to think about South Africa's deal to stop relying on coal. Well, that has been hailed, of course, as a watershed moment by Cyril Ramaphosa. So these are all really important marks of progress, but the underlying current is frustration. And think of, from the business perspective, Bill Gates, Microsoft, he said, look, we really need to drive down the cost of all these green technologies. Look what happened with solar panels. They were really expensive and now they've become cheaper. The same thing with lithium-ion batteries. Now they've become more affordable. And that process needs to happen, subsidies and so forth, in about 6 other technologies to make sure that everyone, not just the wealthy nations, but poor and more vulnerable nations have equal access to these new technologies to push the transition to net zero. And then you've got campaigners like Greta Thunberg saying that COP26 is all blah, 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 and that there won't be any real changes. But that's, of course, the opposite of what all the delegations are working really, really hard for. But in terms of the big goals, I'd say so far, and it's still early, so far they remain elusive.
Thank you so much for all that. Juliet Mann speaking to us from the COP26 summit. Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thank you so much for watching.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Tension building up in Ethiopia amid a state of emergency and a threat by rebel fighters to march in the capital. Ousted Sudanese Prime Minister about to make a return to leading the country's government. And we look at the existential threats of climate change on the African continent. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In business, how Nigerians are adapting to their digital currency just over a week after it was launched. And Africa's first bicycle museum opened its doors in Cape Town, South Africa. We begin in Ethiopia, where a state of emergency for 6 months has been declared after forces from the northern region of Tigray claim to have seized key cities. Tuesday's announcement came 2 days after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed urged citizens to take up arms to defend themselves against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has reiterated his call for an immediate end to the hostilities and ensure humanitarian aid reaches the northern regions. The U.S. Embassy in Ethiopia has ordered Americans to consider leaving the country. Well, Guram Chala has more from the capital, Addis Ababa. Hi again, Guram. Speak to us. What's the situation like in Addis Ababa after the imposition of the state of emergency?
Hannah, the state of emergency for 6 months is a nationwide state of emergency following what the government said is an endangered sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. So there are going to be so many restrictions, including curfews and also others. Now, in Addis Ababa city and in other parts of the country, except the north, the situation looks to be normal and calm. But as you've said, embassies like the United States have came up with security alerts telling their citizens perhaps to consider leaving the country or not leave Addis Ababa city to other parts of the country, as they are expecting war to intensify, even come to the capital city itself. Other embassies are also considering evacuation plans, but we don't really know a report of mass evacuation happening at the moment, except that few people or some people are, for personal decisions, leaving the country, not necessarily being pushed by the insecurity in the city, as the city remains to be calm. So in general terms, we can report that there is no panic in the city at the moment. Of course, people are asked in the city to comply with the state of emergency's terms and conditions, and so far there is no really significant happening that we have observed in the city, Hannah.
Guram, what do you see as the way forward from here?
Well, the way forward, according to many, including the United Nations and different governments, our neighboring states in the African Union, is expectedly or hopefully should be a peaceful resolution of the ongoing conflict. By the way, Hannah, today marks exactly 1 year since the war in the north started, after what the government called an assault against the northern command was taken by the TPLF force. Since then, so many lives have been lost. In their thousands, people have left their residence. The war from Tigray has descended itself into the Amhara regional state and the Afar regional state. So this is a chaos that Ethiopia never wanted, and it was not supposed to happen, according to many. Peaceful resolution was supposed to happen in the beginning. It didn't happen. So many lives have been lost, and now the war is also intensifying, and there is a danger that the capital city can be affected at the same time. The government is saying that there is a military solution in the front, that it is at the end of the day going to win the war, because this war has been waged against the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ethiopia. The Prime Minister promised that his army, the army of the nation, will finish the job. TPLF is promising. It has created a merger with OLA, the Oromo Liberation Army, by the way, and they are considering a march to the capital city itself. So in general terms, the expectation is supposed to be peace. But at the moment, we cannot really report that there is a peaceful solution, at least for now. But what we can report, unfortunately, is on an ongoing war in Kobolcha and also Dese areas. War has continued, and it is continuing, claiming lives.
Kiram, thank you so much for all that. We'll continue to speak to you on this story. Well, since war broke out between Ethiopian federal troops and the Tigray People's Liberation Front in November of last year, the conflict is reported to have led to hundreds of deaths. An estimated 400,000 people have since been plunged into famine, while more than 2.5 million people were forced to flee their homes. Jane Keo takes a look at some of the key moments of the conflict.
On 4th November 2020, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops into the northern region of Tigray, accusing the Tigray People's Liberation Front of mounting surprise attacks on military bases in the area. On 14th November 2020, the TPLF fired rockets at 2 airports in the Amhara region, and at the Eritrean capital Asmara, the rebels accused Eritrea of sending soldiers into Tigray. By the end of November 2020, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed told Parliament that operations in Tigray had ended and his soldiers were in control of the capital Mekelle. But things were not as good on the ground, it seemed, as tens of thousands of civilians moved east, deeper into Tigray in March 2021. The fleeing Tigrayans accused the Amhara forces of rape, killings and looting, accusations that the Amhara region officials denied. By this time, the conflict had raised alarm bells among the international community. On 23rd March, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed confirmed for the first time that Eritrean troops had entered Tigray after months of denials from both nations. On June 11th, the United Nations reported that 350,000 Tigrayans were experiencing famine in the region. By June 24th, an airstrike in Tigray's town of Togoga killed at least 51. The Ethiopian army says it hit combatants. On June 29th, the Tigrayan forces took control of Mekelle. By July 13th, Tigrayan forces pushed south and west into land claimed by neighboring Amhara region. On September 29th, food aid started trickling into the Tigray region. And on October 11th, Ethiopia launched a major offensive aimed at pushing Tigrayan forces out of Amhara and Afar regions. Jane Keo, CGTN.
Well, joining us now for more on that situation in Ethiopia is Martin Plout. He is a senior researcher at the University of London. Hi, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Live. Martin, what is your understanding of the situation in Ethiopia at the moment?
Well, it is very critical. I mean, the government has declared a state of emergency. It's essentially asked all civilians to go to the front lines with anything they have. I've seen images of trucks filled with young boys going forward to face machine guns armed with no more than machetes. So this is a really appalling situation. And I think, far from hundreds dying, we're closer to tens of thousands of people who've already been killed in this war, which is the largest global war taking place right now, with something like 600,000, 700,000 people fighting each other.
Martin, with the threat of the rebels marching to the capital, Addis Ababa, do you believe there might still be room at this point for negotiations, or is the military option the only way out?
I think at the moment, it's highly likely that the military is the way that this will be settled. But of course, at the end of the day, it is always necessary to talk, even if it's only in the form of a surrender. So, of course, negotiations should always be given a chance if it is possible. I mean, nothing is worse than war in that sense. But the situation at the moment is on the ground with one town after another falling to the rebel advance.
Martin, the African Union headquarters is in the Ethiopian capital. How concerned should the entire continent be about the escalation of fighting in the country?
Well, of course, the African Union should be concerned about fighting anywhere, but it has been really marginalized in the entire war, which has now been going on for a year. It began on the 3rd, 4th of November last year. And it was marginalized by the Ethiopian government, who refused to accept the mediators who had been appointed by the African Union. And once that happened, there wasn't much role for the African Union, and it has been really left to outsiders, the United States in particular, to try and help, and President Obasanjo of Nigeria to act as a mediator. But they haven't got very far.
Well, talking about those outside influences or mediators that you're speaking about, the call to citizens to arm themselves, and you mentioned this in detail, Martin, made by the Ethiopian central government, has further highlighted just how dire the situation is. What do you think will happen in the coming days, and what role do you think the international community could play at this point?
I think it's very difficult. The international community has lost credibility on both sides, really. Partly because the Security Council has been blocked from acting by the Chinese and the Russians, both of whom have refused to allow debates to take place in the UN Security Council. The Tigrayans have begged for an airlift to be brought in regardless of what the Ethiopian government said, because they are getting no aid into the country whatsoever. I mean, into the region whatsoever. It is blockaded on all sides by the Ethiopian government, and their people are dying. I mean, there are 400,000 people in starvation conditions right now, and there's nothing getting in. It's appalling.
Martin Platt, thank you so much for joining us. He's senior researcher at the University of London. Well, developing news coming out of Sudan. Assad Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has now reportedly agreed to return to lead a government. Citing unnamed sources, Saudi-owned Al Arabiya TV say that Hamdok agreed to make the move on the condition that political detainees were released. This comes just after over a week after Sudan's top general locked up political leaders and seized power, sparking mass protests and a deadly crackdown. Well, CGTN's Nava Mukhedin joins us from Khartoum for more on this. Nava, hi again. It looks like the ousted Prime Minister may agree to return and lead the government in Sudan. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, actually the Prime Minister may agree, but for now the news are not confirmed. News saying that Hamdok has already agreed to form the government is not confirmed, and some officials, ousted officials, denied it. We tried to contact them and they said no, there is no news about this yet, because Hamdok's conditions were not fulfilled, or no one of it was responded by the military generals, like releasing the detainees or give him the mandate to form his government or to even restore his ousted government. So till now, it's not confirmed news that Hamdok will be back on the scene.
Now, but what should we expect to come out of these negotiations between the military and the civilian wing in Sudan, and how soon do you think we could hear of an agreement coming across when it comes to governance?
Actually, the situation right now is frozen, because whenever they start to talk and whenever mediation efforts are made, any party is clinging to their mind and their what they think and their plan. For instance, the political parties just said that they will never adhere the military general's plan or be part of any arrangements of military general's plan, and they said they will never talk to them. They just want the power to be shared, to be handed over to the civilian rule or civilian leaders. In the same time, military generals, they said they will not get back from what they did, and Hamdok, he made conditions for that, and the street is so defiant to restore Hamdok and his government. In the same time, the street also wants, if Hamdok is back with appointing government out of technocrats, I think the street will be pleased with this. So right now, it's not clear whether this situation will ever be solved or not. It depends on the pressure by the international community, by the mediations, internal and abroad mediations, and by the street, whether they will accept any scenario. But for now, Sudan is facing open scenario for anything, whether the military generals will go ahead and form the government, and then we will see the reaction of the street, whether Hamdok will be back, but his conditions will not be achieved or responded by the generals, or the political parties will be excluded from the scene. So right now we are awaiting for more scenarios from Sudan.
Thank you so much for that, Nava. I'm sure we'll continue to hear from you on all the latest that's coming out of Sudan. Let's now take a short break and return. More news in Africa Live, including we'll look at the existential threats of climate change on the African continent. And Africa's first bicycle museum opens its doors in Cape Town, South Africa.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. World leaders at the COP26 climate conference have pledged to reverse deforestation, but in Gabon, there are some challenges with trying to pursue that goal. The Central African country is home to a big part of the world's second largest rainforest, but oil revenues are in decline, and simply halting the activities of the logging industry is not seen as a realistic option. Mohamed Abubakar has more.
This is Gabon's rainforest. The so-called lungs of Africa stores more carbon per hectare than the Amazon. This helps regulate temperatures and generate rain for millions in the arid Sahel and distant Ethiopian highlands. And despite his job, lumberjack Rodrigue Mbomba recognizes that the cutting down of trees here is a somber moment.
It's heart-wrenching because we're destroying part of the environment in a way, but what else can we do? We cut it down because we're asked to. We have to cut this tree, get it out, and sell it so we can make a living.
But Gabon faces a conundrum. Its oil industry, which fuels 45% of its economy, is in decline. The Minister of Forests believes halting industrial logging is not realistic.
Let them come here and show me how to manage the forest and how to create jobs for the Gabonese people and how to replace the oil economy that we're going to lose because developed countries have polluted the atmosphere, so nobody's going to buy our oil anymore. Let them show me how I replace $12 billion worth of oil revenues without cutting a tree down.
The government believes it can maintain the forests by allowing logging concessions, which must be certified to cut just 1 or 2 trees per hectare with 25-year gaps to let the areas recover. Even as it makes sure that the country keeps its forest cover, the government hopes this can also create jobs for the local population.
It's going to become very difficult to move a log in Gabon without the forestry department knowing about it, and therefore to do it illegally.
Gabon banned the export of unprocessed logs, but without proper oversight, environmentalists say logging can still open areas up for illegal felling, poaching and agriculture. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Well, African leaders have been calling for a fair deal at the ongoing COP26 conference in Glasgow. During their speeches, the leaders stressed their commitment to taking significant steps to combat climate change. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
African heads of state have committed to prioritize actions that help the continent adapt to the impacts of climate change. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, while addressing delegates, said it's important for countries to embrace low carbon emission and develop resilience to control climate change.
What we need now is to recognize that we are in a race against time And we need unanimity of purpose. We need boldness and unwavering political commitment to achieve the 1.5-degree pathway.
Science is clear that we only have a small window of opportunity to ensure that we collectively take decisive action and prevent the negative impact of climate change.
Malawian President Lazarus Chakwera urged nations to answer the calls of millions of Africans affected by the devastating effects of climate change.
We must answer them by establishing timelines for replacing all toxic technologies with clean ones. We must answer them through bilateral and multilateral relations that build green economies. And as you consider your answer, know that neither Africa in general nor Malawi in particular will take no for an answer.
On his part, the Liberian President George Weah called for a united global front in addressing the climate crisis.
Together, we can make a difference as a shared community of global citizens with a common destiny. Together, we can heal the world from the scourges of climate change. Together, we can save this earth from the deadly consequences of global warming.
The 2021 UN Climate Change Conference is a crucial moment for efforts to address the climate crisis. World leaders are expected to come up with key resolutions to keep the rise in the global average temperature to below 2 degrees. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, as climate talks continue in Glasgow, families in southern Madagascar are reported to be bracing themselves for yet another harsh year ahead. The ongoing drought in the country is showing no signs of abating, which experts say signals the rising threat of extreme hunger. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi brings us the latest.
Severe hunger has affected over 1.1 million people in Madagascar, with about 1,400,000 of them inching closer to a famine. The situation is alarming and is set to worsen by the end of the year, according to some experts. And the number of people in famine-like conditions is expected to double.
Because of the drought, because of the sandstorms, this is a new phenomenon that has manifested itself in the last couple of years. Prices are skyrocketing because of the very poor agricultural production, and people do not have enough food to eat. They do not have enough money to have access to the food, and malnutrition rates are augmenting.
The drought in the country has led to a huge drop in food supplies. Many families have been left hungry, and some have resorted to survival measures such as eating locusts, wild leaves, and cactus leaves, which are usually fed to cattle.
This is what we eat. This is all the people in the village eat. Because it's been 5 years since there was any rain. Those who had herds of zebus have no more, because they have sold all their cattle. Look at our crops. There are no leaves growing, not even one. When you pass on the road, you can see it's dry. There are only sandy winds.
These people have not contributed to climate change, but they're paying probably the highest price.
Madagascar has suffered from exceptionally warm temperatures, deficits in rainfall, and unexpected sandstorms that have covered fields, left crops wilted, and led to below-average harvests. By April this year, about 70% of the Grand Sud was in drought, with food production estimated at only a third of the last 5-year average. The World Food Programme has been trying to reach around 700,000 people every month with emergency life-saving food, as well as supplementary nutrition products for pregnant and nursing women and children. The organization says it aims to scale up its response in southern Madagascar and urgently needs $69 million over the next 6 months to support this mission. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN.
Over in southern Africa, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa is once again urging Western countries to remove illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe. Mnangagwa says the sanctions have badly affected Zimbabwe's capability to develop its economy and improve people's livelihoods.
Zimbabwe has not been spared from climate change challenges, which have led to an increasing frequency of severe droughts and cyclone-induced floods. These, coupled with the economic sanctions imposed on us and the COVID-19 pandemic, have had negative impacts on the lives and livelihoods of the people of my country. The removal of the illegal sanctions imposed on my country will undoubtedly enhance the timely achievement of our commitments. Zimbabwe is open for business, and my government stands ready to welcome and facilitate investments from across the world towards greening our economy and achieving sustainable development, which leaves no one and no place behind.
To South Africa now, where the continent's first bicycle museum has just opened its doors. The Trails End Bicycle Museum just outside Cape Town boasts an impressive collection of rare and historical bikes. It also chronicles the evolution of the bicycle from its very beginning to the modern-day human-powered vehicles we see today. CGTN's Travis Andrews paid a visit to the gallery and filed this report.
From the 1500s to 2021, the Trails End Bicycle Museum has it all, with an impressive collection of curated pieces that also include those from the 60s and 70s. The museum presents a record of the development of the bicycle, from what started out as just a wheel to what people ride today. In addition to 24 curated pieces, the museum also has bicycles of historical significance.
Two of the really old ones aren't I mean, the one's a mock-up of Da Vinci's ideas that may or may not have happened, but found on the back of one of his paintings. And that we got from the Science Center. And then also a replica of von Drijs's first Lauf machine, which is a real first bike. And then we've really got a beautiful penny farthing.
Among the collection at the museum are choppers, surfboard bikes and recumbents, which are some of the modern pieces. Bicycle paraphernalia is also on display, and the museum aims to educate the public about the evolution of the bicycle.
Coming into the Industrial Revolution, suddenly there were cogs and chains and so on available, but the roads were still really bad, but they had improved. So people started fiddling around, but then you saw things like the high ordinary or the penny farthing that with that big wheel.
For some visitors, the museum is not just an educational journey into the development of the bicycle, but also an interactive experience. A step back into the early 1900s with this bicycle gives some insight into how practical bicycles have become.
I think there's a lot of curiosity around it, because I think people are wondering where the history of the bicycle started. So I think for children and for schools, groups, I think it's going to be wonderful to feed that imagination.
Very unique, it's something different. It's a great add-on for our valley and a great add-on for Trails End. And I think it's amazing. We're moving to the next level.
For now, the museum is continuing to scour the continent for other rare examples of bicycles that can be displayed to present an even better experience of just how far these unique machines have come. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, time for us to take another short break and return your business news for the day, including how Nigerians are adapting to their digital currency just over a week after it was launched.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Shirushi, Tunis, Cairo,
Nigeria,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for the day's business news. Nigeria recently launched Africa's first digital currency, which is legal tender in the country and the direct liability of the central bank. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam hit the streets of Abuja to get reactions on the e-naira from people living in Africa's biggest economy.
The launch of Nigeria's digital currency is seen as a major milestone for the West African nation. Its central bank was averse to cryptocurrency, banning all banks from making such transactions, only to make a U-turn 8 months down the line. But how much traction is the e-naira gaining so far? Earlier, we asked a few residents if they're keen on investing or transacting through this means. Here's what they had to say.
If there are no charges, I think e-naira is good to go. But if that charges still remain, e-naira is not good to go. Let them leave us for who we are and let's move on.
A lot of things in Nigeria now is all about scamming. So now we would have to trust this thing enough to want to do it.
Well, actually, I own a Binance wallet. I would like to invest a little in it and see what I can get from it.
Analysts believe the e-naira could be economically viable, but government would have to do so much more to get people on board.
Agreed, you say that this would improve cross-border transactions and all that. But how many Nigerians have those necessary gadgets and tools to enable them access and use this platform? And again, you know that there is always a potential of fraudsters getting into that field. And people are wary of what this will mean. Days after launching this, there we had somebody, a set of people had already put on a fake social media handle for e-naira. So that to a great extent, again, substantiate the fears of people.
Nigeria is one of a few countries in the world and first in Africa to launch its official digital currency. Cryptocurrency adoption is popular in Nigeria, especially among the youth population. According to 2020 data by trading giant Paxful, the West African nation ranked second place after the US in Bitcoin trade volumes. President Muhammadu Buhari says the e-naira could boost Nigeria's GDP by $29 billion over the next decade. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Over in Sudan, the Sudanese Bankers Association has temporarily suspended a strike its members have been on since last week's military takeover. The Sudanese Bankers Association says the strike has been suspended for 3 days. This to allow the salaries of state employees to be paid. Banks in Khartoum have witnessed a large influx of customers whose businesses have been disrupted. Following the military takeover, schools and universities remain closed, as well as private and public companies and a large number of markets and shops. Well, the shift to electric vehicles is well underway, with global leaders calling for an end to gasoline vehicles by the year 2040. But how prepared is Africa for the shift? CGTN's Penina Karibe brings us the following story.
One of Nupia taxi company cars being charged for the next trip. There are 60 of such cars in Nairobi right now. This is the first taxi company to venture into this model. Chief Executive Yuha Suhanen is very proud of his decision.
We are installing more charging stations and we are importing more cars.
They started with 3 vehicles and only 2 charging stations in late 2018. Today, the company's fleet has grown.
We are importing more cars. And actually today we have already imported more than 60 cars and we are growing.
But it has not been without its challenges.
We were kind of expecting that the government will do something about the taxes and duties on these cars like some other African countries have already done. But unfortunately we haven't seen that, so that has slowed down us a bit. And when you add on top of that COVID has made it a bit more expensive to import these cars when it comes to transportation cost and all this. So it practically means that the price of these cars has increased. And of course that has slowed us a bit down, but nevertheless we have the investment money and we are growing.
Some of those African countries he's referring to include Rwanda, which this year zero-rated importation of electric and hybrid vehicles and electric charging station equipment. As an operator of electric vehicles, what are some of the incentives you would love to have from government to make it easy for you to operate?
Well, I would like to see that similar terms that were given to, for example, to players who imported solar panels to Kenya some time back. So meaning that when we are building out this charging network, which is good for the country and the people, maybe there could be something that could be done for the duties and taxes on those devices. And same what comes to the duties of these cars, since we're not consuming any gasoline, which is benefiting the people and the country.
The global shift to electronic vehicles has begun, with most world leaders suggesting traditional gasoline cars should be phased out by the year 2040. In fact, the new wave of battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles is slowly transforming the automobile industry. So how prepared is Africa for this shift? Let's find out. If you had $20,000 to buy a car, what kind of car would you go for, electric vehicle or a petrol vehicle?
Electric vehicle.
Why?
Basically, because the fuel vehicle, there are a lot of variances in prices. Sometimes you're not sure whether at some point the prices will go up.
I would prefer electric, but there are challenges before I make the decision, because now I'll need to find out how to go about charging the car and actually upkeep and maintenance of the car. Yeah, because now that's a big issue. I don't think Africa has fully embraced the electronic car industry as yet. But I thought I saw a Tesla the other day, so I don't know.
I'll still go for petrol for now.
Why?
Because they're cheaper, reliable. Teslas in the US, at least they are a bit cheaper, and they are made for their roads. Including the softwares, nanini. In Kenya, we don't have the infrastructure, first of all.
But for the drivers of these electric cars, the benefits are innumerable both to them and the customers.
The first reason is that these cars are friendly to the environment. The second is that the car is very quiet, so the customer enjoys a peaceful ride. And third, our prices are cheaper compared to the gasoline cars, since we don't incur expenses of fuel and frequent servicing at the mechanic like the gasoline vehicles.
The shift may still be some time away from being fully implemented in Kenya, but the expectation for the government to hasten is evident. Penina Karibe, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
It's sport news after the break, including Kenya's Vihiga